We're looking at part 4. I'm still here on page 528 because one of the things that I failed to do during the sexual cycle description is that I failed to mention that in most cases the parasympathetic and the sympathetic system are working in some degree of conflict with one another. So the idea that if you're going to run a 100-meter dash, that you're going to really be using a lot of sympathetic activity and that you're not going to be having much parasympathetic activity amidst all of that until much later when you're in recovery from the sympathetic activity of a sprint. Okay, so and the same thing goes for digesting food. If you've had a meal, you're actually engaged in parasympathetic activity, and a strong emotional moment or the need to go dash someplace in the middle of a significant meal time can be disruptive of the parasympathetic experience of eating, right? And so in most cases, parasympathetic and sympathetic events are at a distance from one another. Okay, probably most significantly would be sleep, parasympathetic, and then waking up in the morning, sympathetic. So the tone for each one is rather unique to particular areas of life. So I would say in the sexual cycle, we have the rare situation where they serve each other. We begin with parasympathetic, we move to sympathetic, and we recover with parasympathetic. And so they're very smoothly connected to one another. Okay, that then brings us to the sympathetic nervous system. And here they like us to take a very, how shall I say, close look. I'll come to this in a moment. But first I want to get the overview here. And so let's take a look here at the big overview. And we'll sort of go back and forth. Here is our T1 to L2. It's the lateral horn of the spinal portions of T1 to L2. Okay, that means that when we come out, this is a spinal root here with, and of course this is the branch of the spinal cord that's called the white rami communicantes. Okay, and then we're going to enter a portion of the sympathetic trunk. We're either going to synapse at that level, synapse at a different level, or we're just going to pass straight through and do something at some distance. The goal here is that the first order neuron has to find a synapse with a second order neuron. The second order neuron is presented to us in this lighter green color, sort of a more minty green color, and then we have more of this darker, deeper green color as the first order neuron. Okay, and so in this one case, we're going to go all the way to the adrenal medulla. So the adrenal gland is like this little beanie sitting on the top of a kidney. And then we go to the center portion of the adrenal gland, the adrenal medulla, and that's where we have our epinephrine, norepinephrine, which goes directly to the blood. Everybody else here is engaged in hardwired activities. Okay, so we'll come to this again. And I wanted that quick little overview. So here we have the setup and our situation. This sort of represents the analog here drawn for us. And what's going on here is probably even more easily seen, come to think of it, from this perspective. So let's take a look here and see what we can see. We can see a ventral root and a dorsal root. Okay, when we looked at the actual anatomy of the spinal cord, I pointed out to you, because we were looking from the posterior aspect, I pointed out a set of dorsal rootlets that led to a spinal nerve. And it was more difficult, but there was also a denticulate ligament right in here. And if you looked past it, you would see the ventral. So here we're actually looking from the ventral angle at this point. Dorsal is back here. Here is our gray matter. This gray matter right here and right here only appears in the spinal cord at the level of T1 to L2. If we're above T1, we don't see this. If we're below L2, we don't see it until, again, we hit somewhere around S2 to S4, in which case we start to see it again a little bit. But basically, the only time we see a lateral horn and we're going to call it a lateral horn, is that we're going to be seeing it here in the sympathetic nervous system. So let's take a look at this neuron right here. Here's the cell body in the central nervous system. It's in the lateral horn. It's going to come out through the ventral portion of the spinal cord, and it's going to enter the ventral root. Okay, the ventral root here is leading us to the spinal nerve. It's going to join up with the dorsal root. This is a one-way street going inward, sensory. This is a one-way street coming outward, motor. So here we are in the spinal nerve, and we're at the same level as the spinal cord there. We're coming out, and we're in the spinal nerve right now, very briefly. Here's the dorsal primary ramus or branch. Here is the ventral primary ramus or branch. And here is the dark green coming in. Take a close look there, and we're going to have a synapse. Do you see that? This is the white ramus communicantes. The quiz could ask you, what's in the white ramus communicantes? And the answer is always the parasympathetic preganglionic fiber. Parasympathetic sympathetic, the sympathetic preganglionic fiber. That's the only thing that can be found in a white ramus communicantes, is the sympathetic preganglionic. Now we're going to have a synapse, and this synapse, of course, it's an acetylcholine synapse. It uses nicotinic receptors. Okay, now we're going to go to the second order neuron. The second order neuron is in this lighter green color. Do you see it? It's sort of minty. It's going to go through what's called the gray ramus communicantes, back out to the spinal nerve, and go out to the effector, wherever that effector is. Okay, someplace out here. Okay, so that's one option, synapse at the same level. Let's go to option number 2. Here we're going to have, again, the neuron, cell body in the central nervous system, lateral horn coming out, the ventral root. The ventral root joins up with the spinal nerve. The spinal nerve goes through its intervertebral foramen. We go over here, and now we're at the white ramus. The white ramus leads us into the sympathetic ganglion. Okay, this is a sympathetic preganglionic fiber. Okay, in this case, we have to go and do something at a higher level. Could be heading toward the eye or some other upper portion. And so we're going to go up a level and synapse. Here's our second order neuron. The second order neuron exits through the gray ramus, back to the spinal nerve, and off to the effector organ. Now we're at the third level. Whoops, that was first, second. Now we're at the third level. Okay, so here's the cell body. It's in the lateral horn, going to the ventral root, and coming to the spinal nerve. And now we're going to come through the white ramus, and we're going to pass right through the sympathetic trunk, and we're going to go to what's called here a collateral ganglion. So you might have heard of the solar plexus, you might have heard of other pre-aortic ganglia that actually reside right on the surface of the aorta in the abdominal cavity, and we're going to synapse. And we're going to go to some organ in the abdominal region. Okay. Then there's finally a fourth thing that happens that they don't mention, but we're going to go by the same route here. Ventral horn, spinal nerve. We're going to come out here through. Now it's important to note this is a splanchnic nerve. It could be a thoracic, a lumbar, abdominal, pelvic, splanchnic nerve, different levels. And in this case, we're not going to go to a collateral ganglion. We're going to go to the adrenal medulla. That's the fourth option, and in fact, it is the biggest option. So it's kind of ironic that the textbook does not include number 4 here, but I've included it for you so that you don't miss out on anything.